That was basically my home. My parents had all the knickknacks from like games to movies. It was basically a playground. I absolutely loved it. I hear 4 loud shots.
Someone is a robber or a pumpkin?
Does he have a gun?
Yes, he's got my pants.
I remember it coming over the radio, kind of in disbelief.
Michael got along with everybody. He was on the good side of everybody.
Between you and me, brother, they were crooked people.
He had a large sum of money. Really, anybody could have followed him and figured out where he was going to be and when.
Maybe everyone else in there was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
September 20th, 2013, Danville, Kentucky. As dawn breaks, Michael and Angie Hawkinsmith arrive at the pawn shop they manage, ABC Gold Games and more. Their baby daughter Naomi and 9-year-old son Andrew in tow.
The pawn shop, that was basically my home. We had all the knickknacks of a pawn shop, from like games to movies to all sorts of junk. It was basically a playground. Yeah, I absolutely loved it. It was simply amazing.
The Hawkinsmiths are always together, even on school days.
My mom was determined to educate me in a home setting.
When they first started to homeschool Andrew, they put homeschool in the middle of everything. So when Michael worked at the pawn shop, Angie would help him with things at the pawn shop. So Andrew would go in there, he would sit and study. He had his own little desk and everything. And they were always trying to spend time together.
The Hawkinsmith family story starts a decade earlier, when Michael, working as a youth pastor in central Kentucky, meets a young woman as dedicated to her faith as he is.
He met Angie. And I think they got stuck together and they stayed that way. It's kind of like you didn't see one without the other.
Before long, Michael and Angie marry, and the family doubles in size.
Michael was on cloud 9. He just loved the idea that they would have a boy and a girl, and that their life would be complete.
My dad, he made things look so easy, and he was truly an amazing person. He would have a crowd of people, and he'd just be talking to somebody about something, and then he would just pick me up by the leg and throw me up in the air. And everybody'd be like, don't drop him. But he never dropped me. He always caught me by the leg and just put me down. My mom, of course, she was the pastor's wife. And so that's a big role to take. She was also a very sociable person, lovable person. She would always make friends with anyone and everyone.
He'd go preaching. Angie, she would sing. She constantly sang.
We went from church to church to church. It was simply amazing.
The family's journey eventually leads them to Danville, Kentucky in 2013.
They found a church here in Danville that they wanted to attend or get involved in. And when it comes to him in church, him being a parent, or anything he did, his whole heart or nothing.
Michael puts that same level of dedication into the part-time job he takes at a pawn shop to support the family while he preaches. Steve Devine, the owner of the pawn shop, quickly makes Michael a partner and lets him take over running the business.
He'd been working there for, maybe a year and a half before they opened the store that morning.
The morning of September 20th, 2013 starts out like any typical day. By 9 a.m., the pawn shop is open for business.
Once my dad got started, I did my own thing. I grabbed me a game system of some sort and started playing.
Within 15 minutes of opening, a regular customer enters the store.
The gold man, Dan Smith, came in.
Dan Smith, like Michael Hawkinsmith, is a part-time pastor. He makes his money buying and selling gold at pawn shops and jewelry stores.
They was both at the desk conversating, dealing with money and whatnot.
Michael and Dan are haggling. Angie is rocking baby Naomi near the register. Andrew is testing out a video game. It's a routine morning. None of them are aware that these will be their final moments together.
Shortly after, this guy, he came in as well. And I was like, he's kind of weird looking. He starts to pull out a gun and kind of raises his voice a little bit and says, "Get on the ground." And we all did because we was petrified. Me, Mom, and my sister all huddled up to a corner.
Andrew hears strange, high-pitched sounds as he watches the unthinkable. A man shooting at his mother, father, and Dan.
For me, it sounded like a dart gun. Dad was like, "Please stop." So that happened, and he started rolling around until he wasn't. He stopped. But then Dan Smith was next, and then he was going to go after us. And my mom, she told me, like, to go in the back with my sister. So I do. I crawl all the way back to the office, and I sit my sister on the couch. I'm sitting right beside her. Of course, shaken up and don't even know what's going on. I hear 4 loud shots. And I remember crawling over to the doorway and seeing that my mom was just laying there with a puddle of blood, big puddle of blood. And so I picked up the phone and called on it.
911, where's your emergency?
Someone is a robber at a pawn shop.
Someone's robbing the pawn shop?
And my parents got shot.
Where's the robber?
He's right here right now.
Investigators catch haunting glimpses of a calculating killer.
We were starting to get these little clips of the silver minivan circling the area.
You can tell the van is kind of waiting. The way the whole crime played out, I think that it could be something professional.
And hear the voice of the man who may be responsible for a triple murder.
Oh, nobody, none of this, because what does it make me look like? It makes me look like the perpetrator, see?
My parents got shot.
Where is the robber?
He's right here right now.
9-year-old Andrew Hawkinsmith makes a desperate 911 call as he hides with his baby sister in the back of his family's pawn shop after an armed robber opened fire on his parents and their customer.
The robber, does he have a gun?
Yes. He shot my parents.
Okay, can he see you?
I'm in the back right now.
You're in the
He
back?
see me.
So the robber's up front of the store?
Yes, but I don't know if he's here or not. But come quickly.
Where are your parents?
Oh. They're dead on the ground. Come here quickly because I'm afraid. Please hurry.
Okay, they're coming, okay?
I was just sitting there with my sister and hoping to God that these police come.
Danville Police Detective A.J. Mullins is one of the first to respond.
I remember it coming over the radio, kind of in disbelief. Is that what I really heard? And it's what everybody just dropped whatever we were doing. And we got down there.
It takes police less than 6 minutes to arrive at the pawn shop.
They came very quickly, and I had walked to the door with phone in hand and sister in the other, and walking by these dead bodies of people that I loved. I was petrified. I didn't know what I was looking at. And out I walk with my sister.
When I arrived at the parking lot of the pawn shop up front, our captain at the time had come to my window and said, "We need you to get these kids out of here as soon as possible. We've got bodies inside." And they put them in my vehicle, and Andrew held Naomi on the way there to the police department.
At Danville PD, we actually only have 4 full-time detectives, and we take anything from a theft to a murder. So it was a huge case, so we needed all hands on deck.
I don't care how many times you've done it or seen it, there's nothing that truly prepares you for this.
After taking the Hawkinsmith children safely away from the crime scene, Detective Mullins rushes back to the pawn shop to join the investigation.
When you first walk into the door, there's a counter, glass counter. Angela's body was kind of in the corner near the register. And Michael was on the other side, where it looked like had been gold, some jewelry kind of laid out as if he was the one speaking to Dan at the time all this went down. And Dan, you could tell where Dan fell initially, and then someone had drug him back where it would be harder to see him.
You could see clearly the drag marks of blood leading in that direction.
And his briefcase was open on top of one of the tables.
Of course, we see tons of shell casings, but they, of course, also have a lot of guns that they're trying to sell that are within the pawn shop, ammunition that they're selling. So it really adds to the whole chaos of everything and not knowing at that point when you initially walk in what's going to be evidence.
When we go through the store, we're having to step around the blood, the shell casings, because we didn't want to step on anything like that. We had never seen anything like this.
There was so much evidence to collect and to process and to go through.
The victims had been shot multiple times, possibly after they were down. The only thing at that time that we could determine was that The spent casings appeared to be from a .22 caliber weapon.
An autopsy will later determine that Michael was shot 8 times in the legs, chest, and head. Angie was shot 3 times in the head. Dan was shot 5 times in the head.
Initially, you're thinking, okay, it's some kind of a robbery. We look at the register. There was still cash in the register.
One would speculate that the register would have been gone through for whatever money it had. So it did not appear that the motive was to rob the actual pawn shop. So that was definitely a red flag.
Obviously, as a police officer, we tried to do the best we could to get it solved as quickly as we could.
We're like, okay, what's going on? Is this more of a personal type issue going on? We're like, what do we have here? Is this something that it was a hit? Was it on Dan Smith? Was it for the Hawkins Smith? Was it all of them?
Police in Danville, Kentucky, investigating a triple murder, need to talk to their only eyewitness, 9-year-old Andrew Hawkinsmith. The frightened child and his baby sister Naomi have been taken to the police station while officers try to locate their next of kin.
They had sat me down and was like, do you have anyone that we could contact so that way they can take you home? And I was like, I don't know, because I didn't know phone numbers. I remember being very shooken up because I was like, where am I gonna go?
And I went back to the police station and interviewed Andrew. Andrew was able to give us a good description of the bad guy.
He looked like a heavy-set dude and like a beard that didn't really look like an authentic beard.
He said, you know how at Halloween when people wear fake beards, there's little tabs?
And he had sunglasses and a cap.
And the suspect, he wore black latex gloves and camouflage coat.
Andrew also provides crucial details about the weapons used in the attack.
Andrew went in the back office, and as he's running, he could hear shots being fired. And he says they sounded different.
I remember making a sound like...
And one of our officers got his silencer, and we showed it to Andrew, and it said, did it look like this? And he said, yes, that's exactly what it was.
The use of a silencer raises frightening concerns for detectives.
The way that just the whole crime played out, I think that it definitely could be a possibility, that it could be something professional.
As detectives consider whether they are hunting for a professional hitman, word of the shooting reaches Michael Hawkinsmith's mother at her home across town. She rushes to the pawn shop.
When I got there, I knew it was not good. I got out of the car and some of the officers met me halfway up the alley. And I said, I want to see my son. You need to go to the police station and see your grandbabies. There's nothing, no worse in this world than to lose a child. But if it hadn't been for Andrew and Naomi, I don't think I would have survived it.
Police locate the family of the third victim, Dan Smith, and break the awful news to them that same day.
I was in college And I get this call from my stepmom, and I could tell from her voice that something was going on. And I couldn't believe what she was saying and said, "What? Like, what?" And I just froze. I just couldn't believe he was gone.
I just couldn't understand, what I was being told. I just couldn't comprehend.
He was such a giver, financially a giver. He was a giver of his time, his energy, his kind words.
As the victims' families try to cope with the devastating news, investigators back at the crime scene are continuing to dig for clues. They canvass the area around the pawn shop and find a promising lead.
We found a witness. He saw a heavy-set, tall, white male coming out of the pawn shop. Described him as having a beard, and he went around to the little alleyway, and there was a van that pulled out of the alleyway and turned right.
The description given was a silver minivan.
The pawn shop doesn't have a security camera, but many other businesses in the area do.
So we reviewed camera footage in the area, and we actually spotted a silver van matching that exact description pass by where the pawn shop's located. We are able to track the silver van basically through town with that video. You can just catch it, drive right by, and it matches the description perfect, right? And then right after that, we see the sliver of it pass there. So you can tell the van is circling this area and kind of waiting.
The detectives cannot make out the van's license plates, but the footage convinces them that the unidentified driver was staking out the pawn shop, or someone inside. Investigators focus on who might have been the target and why.
Well, we started looking at the Hawkinsmiths, who they might have had dealings with.
Of course, you find that they're just a loving, good family. No criminal history and no reason for anybody to want to harm the Hawkinsmiths.
Detectives also take a closer look at the Hawkinsmiths' business.
Steve Devine was a co-owner of the actual pawn shop in partnership with the Hawkinsmiths.
So we go and talk to him, and turns out he was actually supposed to be there that day.
The detectives learn that Steve Devine knew the Hawkinsmiths were scheduled to do a gold deal with Dan Smith that morning.
He said that he woke up because of something with his allergies, and he called and he told him that he wasn't going to make the meeting. So we're like, well, that's what we call a flag.
The detectives must now consider whether Steve Devine purposely avoided the pawn shop that morning because he knew what was going to happen.
It was definitely concerning that the owner of the business, who was supposed to be there, ironically just didn't show up because of allergies.
Detectives investigating a triple murder in Danville, Kentucky are looking into Steve Devine, the business partner of victim Michael Hawkinsmith.
He was supposed to be there and wasn't. And so we're like, what's going on here?
Steve tells police he was sick and with his wife all morning.
We are checking him out and confirm that he's telling us the truth.
His alibi clears him, but their interview with Steve provides detectives with a new direction for the investigation.
He was able to fill the little holes as to what was going on in the pawn shop.
Dan Smith was a gold buyer. So he carries a briefcase with him with a large amount of cash.
Dan Smith's wife was able to tell us that he would do a certain route on certain days of the week. So he goes to his bank, he gets some money, and then he had a lot of pawn shops that he went to.
He'd have anywhere from $30,000 to $100,000, and he went to known businesses on known days. So really anybody could have followed him and figured out where he was going to be and when.
We're thinking maybe he was the actual target, and everyone else in there was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Investigators visit the other pawn shops where Dan did business and ask to see footage from their security cameras.
And then once we started following Dan Smith, we were able to say, you know, boom, he was here at this time on this date, like clockwork.
So this is Dan Smith. This is a pawn shop in Lexington he goes to.
You're trying to look for anything, any odd vehicles that may be following, anyone within the store that may be paying him any particular attention, anything like that.
As they review the tapes, detectives find video from the last pawn shop Dan Smith visited before heading to the Hockensmiths.
This is where Dan Smith arrives at Lawson's Jewelers in Harrodsburg, Kentucky. Be around 8:20. 8:20.
He walks in with that same briefcase and then talks to the lady behind the counter and just appears very relaxed, laughing, has no idea, obviously, where he's headed. I don't even think it was a full hour after this. Dan Smith was killed.
It's kind of odd when you're watching this. This is the guy's, last moments. He doesn't know it. Nobody knows what's getting ready to happen except for one person.
Investigators scour the footage for any indication of who that one person might be.
There was nobody that appeared to be paying any particular attention to him. Mind you, the video was pretty narrowly focused, coming out of the one store, so we couldn't see his full motions once he crossed the street. But reviewing that video at the time, there was nothing that stood out.
We're kind of baffled at this point. Who was even the target?
4 days into the investigation, there's no clear target, no clear motive, and nothing pointing to the identity of the gunman described by 9-year-old Andrew Hockensmith.
We were getting ready to figure out what our next step was, and this phone call came in to the police department from Michigan. And we're like, Michigan, now what do we have here?
The caller from Michigan identifies himself as a pastor. He tells police about someone in the Kentucky area who knew the victims and has been making suspicious comments.
The pastor from Michigan relayed that he was friends with an individual by the name of Kenneth Allen Keith, and that he had communicated with Kenneth Allen Keith and got on the subject about the murders in Danville.
The pastor explained that Kenneth Allen Keith knew the Hockensmiths, and that Kenneth Allen said, talking about the Hockensmiths, that they're not innocent either.
This pastor had said Mr. Keith just switched like a light switch, that something set him off, and he said that they had cost him a lot of money.
And so I think that statement alone really stood out to him, because, you look at they are innocent people, right? He's concerned that potentially his friend, Kenneth Allen Keith, could be involved in this triple homicide. The call was what kind of turned the whole investigation around. When we realized that it could be the Hockensmiths that were actually targeted.
4 days after the murders of Michael and Angie Hockensmith and Dan Smith, police learned that a man named Kenneth Allen Keith has been making suspicious comments about the Hockensmiths.
Once Kenneth Allen's name was mentioned, we started looking, okay, who is this guy?
He was involved in the pawn shop business. He had one in Somerset, Kentucky. And he was a pastor of a small town church in Pulaski County, Kentucky. He appeared to be loved by his local congregation.
That was kind of a common denominator for everybody involved, as they were all heavily into the church, either as pastors, ministers, leaders, just in a church.
But the investigators quickly discover that Kenneth Allen Keith appears to have a different style of preaching than the other pastors.
We found one of his sermons that he had on YouTube where he's on the pulpit and he's got a rifle with a sling on. And he's talking about his past, what he's done. And we're like, okay, you know, we have a sniper here. And the further that we looked into Kenneth Allen, the more we're like, oh, this is a good lead.
So when we start looking into Kenneth Allen Keith, we look into his financial history. And we learned that he had recently been sued by Steve Devine. And so he owed Steve Devine money.
Police learned that Steve Devine, the co-owner of the pawn shop with Michael and Angie, had been in business with Kenneth Allen Keith before putting the Hockensmiths in charge 4 months earlier. Prior to that, the Hockensmiths had actually been Kenneth Allen Keith's employees.
Kenneth felt cheated. He felt that that pawn shop should have been his. And that Steve Devine and the Hockensmiths basically stole it right out underneath his feet.
So we felt that would be a good motive. That would make someone upset. Upset enough to kill someone? We didn't really know the personality or what was really within Kenneth Allen Keith at that time.
But as they dig deeper into Kenneth Allen Keith, detectives uncover what could be another crucial link between him and the murders.
It ended up that there was a silver/gray minivan that was registered and associated with him.
The same kind of vehicle seen on surveillance video speeding away from the crime scene. While all of the evidence is starting to align around Kenneth Allen Keith, investigators know everything they have is only circumstantial. To help them build a more solid case, they reach out to the pastor in Michigan who initially tipped them off to Kenneth and recruit him to help their investigation.
At this point, we want to take that a step further, so arrangements are made to actually record phone calls.
On October 9th, 2013, the Michigan pastor calls Kenneth Allen Keith while the police listen in to see if he says anything incriminating.
When somebody's being murdered in such a heinous way as what this was, you want to make them, out to be saints. I understand that. Mm-hmm. But between you and me, brother, they were crooked people.
Is that right?
They went into it with the whole point from day one to take over that business from me. I don't mean to speak ill.
No, hey, man.
Facts are facts.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. I can't tell nobody none of this because what does it make me look like?
Yeah.
It makes me look like the perpetrator, see?
And during that phone call, he was able to kind of go over what he was doing that day, what his location was, how he wasn't involved.
I was in Danville, but I was at the pharmacy. I'm standing in the pharmacy while all this happened.
We took that information and looked at the video surveillance, and we found that moments after the 911 call, Kenneth Allen Keith was entering the pharmacy in Danville. The timestamps from video gave us the indications on when it occurred, and from the pawn shop to the pharmacy, that was a doable time.
He was actually here at a local pharmacy just within minutes of the time of the murder, which we thought was unusual, to travel basically an hour to pick up a prescription when you have local pharmacies in your local community.
The detectives have no doubt. They are watching Kenneth Allen Keith just moments after committing a triple homicide.
Watching him and knowing that he had just killed 3 people. It's hard to fathom how somebody can just, take somebody's life and then act like it was nothing.
10 days after the murders, police believe they finally have enough to arrest Kenneth Allen Keith. Now, they need to track him down.
We tracked his phone, and we were able to actually see that he had went to Florida.
And when we knew he was on his way back, we were setting up our game plan, what we were going to do, that we were going to have a search warrant at the church, a search warrant at the home where he lived with his family, and a search warrant at the pawn shop in Somerset, Kentucky. And that's when we make our move.
October 9th, 2013. Danville, Kentucky police are waiting as Kenneth Allen Keith, the prime suspect in the murder of Michael and Angie Hockensmith and Dan Smith, returns home from a trip to Florida.
He gets up the next morning from coming home and he goes to his pawn shop. And that's when we make our move. An investigator went in as a potential customer and made contact with Mr. Allen. We didn't go in with guns drawn, anything like that, because pawn shops have guns in them and we don't know where what is. And he came out from his office area and they were able to basically tell him, we've got a search warrant for your pawn shop.
As police search his business, Kenneth Allen Keith is placed under arrest.
During the search of the pawn shop, we discovered a box for a threaded device that can be purchased over the internet that can be fashioned into a makeshift silencer.
The discovery confirms detectives' suspicions that a silencer was used in the killings and explains Andrew Hockensmith's description of a high-pitched sound as his parents were shot.
And then also outside of the business, we found spent .22 shell casings and then a target that had been shot. So we believe that he was practicing prior to the shooting.
The .22 casings found in Kenneth Keith's pawn shop matched all the expended shell casings from the murder scene in Danville, Kentucky. They were shot from the identical weapon.
There was evidence, obviously, that tied him to this case to make it a strong case.
Detectives confront Kenneth Allen Keith with the overwhelming evidence.
We are always trying to get an outright confession, but that did not happen.
We got the opinion that Mr. Allen thought that he was just so intelligent that he was going to beat all this, but he didn't know what we had found.
News of the arrest shocks Dan Smith's family. They know Kenneth Allen Keith and believed he was a good pastor and a friend.
Dad had a previous relationship with Kenneth Allen Keith. He would come in and he would buy and sell. They did business. You're going, wait a minute. That's not a real pastor. But to be able to commit murders on Friday and then get up on the pulpit Sunday morning and preach, especially in front of 2 children.
For Andrew Hawkinsmith, who hid for his life with his baby sister during the murders of his parents, the news comes as a relief.
I remember they was like, hey, Andrew, look at this, look at the news. And they showed me the newscast where they finally caught him. I was like, all right.
Prosecutor Richie Bottoms believes he has all he needs to convict Kenneth Allen Keith on 3 counts of first-degree homicide.
I think the evidence spoke for itself. We felt very confident that we could convince the jury that he did this.
After initially announcing they would seek the death penalty, prosecutors decide to spare Andrew and his baby sister Naomi and Dan Smith's family the pain of a long trial. Instead, they offer Kenneth Allen Keith life without parole in exchange for a guilty plea.
We all come out on the short end of the stick, but that's okay. I don't have to answer for what he did. The man's going to have his own demons he's going to have to live with.
I want people to remember who our dad was. I want him to be remembered by the good things that he did for people. He was a very kind man, and he wanted to help. He wanted to help people, and he did.
I've been told you're a spitting image of your dad, and you look just like him, you act just like him. And my mom, I think Naomi, she looks just like my mom. I'm very thankful for what I have. And in a sense, it's like I am like living through my parents' life, or kind of like a reimagined one. My parents will always live on within me.